Hello, this is the second podcast for growth and development. We are starting to talk about fine motor development. We will start at birth. They're going to have that grasp reflex, which you did go over in OB. That is where if you put your finger in their hand, they will be able to grasp all of your little finger with their hand. By 3 months, the grasp reflex is gone. They should be able to open and close their hands intentionally. They will be pulling on hair and necklaces and earrings, so you do have to be careful of those and choking hazards. By 4 months, they will start beginning hand-eye coordination, so they can look at an object they want to grasp and try to grasp it with two hands. At 6 months old, fine motor development continues to increase. They should be able to hold their bottle. By 7 months, hold their cup. The difference really in this skill is that at 6 months, they're still mostly holding a bottle. By 7 months, and they're sitting up better, they can use a cup, a sippy cup, and some stuff like that more so. 8 months, their forefinger and their thumb are working together. This is when parents start giving their children Cheerios to help develop the fine motor skills. They can pick up those little crackers and pretzels with their pincher grasp. At 10 months to 1 year old, they are pounding on things. Everything becomes a drum. They're putting their toys in a box. They're using tools and scribbling with their little fist on a paper. By 2 years old, their hand-eye coordination is starting to become better. Their scribbling becomes better. They can start to string beads on a piece of string. They can hold their cup well with one hand. Fine motor skills develop. As you can see, they can draw straight lines by 3 years old. This is when they start using the writing style. Instead of fisting their crayons, they can hold it. They can pour from a pitcher. This is small child-sized toy pitcher, not like an adult. Give them a glass pitcher. That's not a good idea. They are usually ambidextrous. They might write and color with both hands at 3 years old. By 4, they're using scissors. They can start to tie their shoelaces, although usually not well. Again, if you as a child or you had a child who did some of these things much earlier, that's okay. If you have a child or were a child who did some of these things later, again, it's okay. This is a rule of thumb to help us to figure out if we need to intervene or if we're having a problem with growth and development, okay? 5 to 6 years, you can see using a hammer. Lowe's has that program for children on Saturdays where they can build a project. I think it's once a month in the school during school time, and it's almost every weekend during the summer. They can build a project. The library has Lego activities over the summer. There's lots of different things to help with growth and development of these aged children. 7 to 8 years old, they would rather print. We don't really teach cursive in all the schools anymore. I do know that they do teach cursive in Hempfield, but it is an elective. So what they do is that's one of the things that they do at the end of the school year when they have extra time. So it's not part of the main curriculum. It's not required, but they do teach them that. All right. Now we need to start to talk about development as far as Piaget and Erikson. Piaget talks about development of the mind. Think of him as far as physical movement, kind of hearing, tasting, moving. Look for patterns to help you remember on how they grow. There's a chart, like I said, in your packet, but you can make a list and write one sentence about each stage for that theorist so that you get a better idea. That way it helps stick a little bit better. But as you can see, Piaget, birth to 2 years, that's a big chunk. And I will tell you that his stages do overlap. Reflexes 0 to 3 weeks. First instinct is to suck. That is an automatic reflex. You can see the other how, according to Piaget, the infant will develop. For toddler 1 to 3 years, he takes that for sensory motor 12 months to 2 years. And as you can see how he breaks it down to tertiary circular reaction, trial and error, beginning reasoning, and object permanence. Object permanence is the understanding that an object continues to exist even if they can't see it. So this is when you're playing peekaboo and they're covering their eyes. You still exist even if they can't see you. And they're going to learn mainly through imitation. So this is the time where if you are somebody who chews with your mouth open, your child is going to show you that by imitating your chewing style. It's an eye-opener if that's what you do while you eat. And as you can see, they just continue to develop 18 to 24 months. You can read there. Their memory skills are starting to form around 2, and they just begin to understand cause and effect, excuse me. So as we continue with Piaget, 2 years to 7, so he has bigger grouping than Erikson. They're talking about memory expanding, beginning to think symbolically. This is when your child is wanting to build something but still can't do it yet. 1 minute they're upset, the next minute they're happy, and vice versa. Then we move on to the pre-operational, and that's 2 to 7 years. Continuing, we are talking about intuitive thought, 4 to 7 years. So they're starting to put multiple words and sentences together. Up until this stage, children parallel play where they play beside each other, but not really together. Now they have a more planned play model of how they play together. Concrete operational, we're talking about 7 to 12 years. They can do some creating now, so puzzles, developing a game. They now understand that there's a relationship between A and B, or 1 and 2. Decentralization, they can pay attention to multiple attributes of an object, so they can separate objects by color, or they could do it by size. They notice that there's not just one way to separate. There's multiple different attributes of that object that they can use. Conservation, this is certain quality will remain the same despite adjusting the size. So, for example, putting the same amount of water in a wide glass versus a tall glass. So they can start to understand that kind of concept in this stage. And we're talking about formal operations, and this is 11 years and up, and this is pretty much where Piaget stops. He's talking about critically thinking and problem solving. Adolescents have that egocentrism begins where they are unable to understand any perspectives besides their own. All right. Here are some of the toys that we use to help develop these fine motor and gross motor skills. Now, let's move on to Erikson. Erikson is one that we use much more often. And Erikson deals more with emotional and intellectual development. His first stage is birth to 1 year, trust versus mistrust. This is the stage where infants gain trust by having their needs met. So being fed, being changed, being held. Meeting your infant's needs when they need it will help develop this. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. This is 1 to 2 years. This is the stage where they are really trying to establish a voice. They will use the word no often. You cannot reason with them. Remember, I talked about this a little when we talked about reasoning with 2-year-olds, but it's really not within their capacity to be able to reason. At this age, we should ignore their tantrums as long as they are safe. So as long as they're being kept safe, you want to ignore when they have a tantrum. Initiative versus guilt. This is, they really want to do something, but when it doesn't go their way, they feel really, really bad about it. So this is that when they're trying to make decisions, but they want if it doesn't work out, they really react poorly. And that's okay. That's part of their development. Industry versus inferiority. This is the stage where your children bring you home all these presents and they're really trying to do things for you. They're focusing on their parent. They're making breakfast and doing these things. And they should be allowed to try to make choices and being taught what are good choices and what aren't. Then we have adolescence to 20 years, identity versus role confusion. This is when they're a teenager and they want to be cool, but they're really not. They don't know who they are physically or emotionally, and they're really trying to find themselves. This is a hard age for children. They're fighting with the same-sex parent, trying to give themselves a voice and things like that. So again, at this stage, the parents are no longer the center of their world. Their friends are. And then we have 20s to 30s. This is really we're talking about only to age 21 for peds, but this is where we're talking about intimacy versus isolation, and love is developing, and they're going through these motions of love, or some have that capacity, but most are going through the motions and trying to start these adult relationships. So, last slide for a little bit is when development is atypical. So maybe a baby is not grasping. This is when we have to start with referrals, PT/OT. This is when we talked about early intervention and IEPs and the special education services. So that we discussed in our last podcast. That will be the end of this podcast for now. We will start with health promotion in the next part of our growth and development podcast.